everybody. It's really lovely to have you here. I would like to begin by offering the traditional land acknowledgement. And we would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, and it's with gratitude that we share this space and welcome you all here. Of course, this is a Nickle at Noon, the online edition. We've been doing online since September and it's going pretty well. We thank you all for joining us. The program is always free. It's pretty much every Thursday. Apologies to those who might have tuned in last Thursday. It was reading week and there wasn't actually an event. But we're back and we're here until probably the middle of April, possibly with a new surprise event coming at the end of April. So watch this space for more details. The full program can be found on our website. You're also welcome to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Like us, share us. And if you feel so inclined, you're welcome to join our mailing list and have announcements delivered into your email inbox. We are trying something a little bit different this time. We will ask that you keep your microphones on mute for the duration of the talk. After the talk, let's have at her. We're also going to hold questions and chat comments until after Hutch is finished speaking. Little experiment, we found that the chat pops up and it's sometimes really disruptive. So we do want to hear from you, but we will hold that until the end. Please be aware that we're recording this and that the cleaned up recording will be added to the Nickle's YouTube channel. Your names and the chat will not be included in the recording. However, if you speak, your voice will end up in that recording. Some introductions. My name is Michelle Hardy. I'm a curator with Nickle Galleries and your host today. Marla Halstad is my sidekick and front-end manager and co-host. She runs the technology and we're always super grateful to have her do so. Next week, FYI, Adam Sidorenko will be joining us and giving an artist talk about his beautiful and monumental portraiture. But the main event, today's presentation, is M.N. Hutchinson called Studio Time, and it is really a pleasure to welcome Hutchinson to Nickle at Noon. We were discussing earlier that although we know each other and have met like ships passing in the night, we never really had a chance to chat. So this is a rare opportunity, and thank you, Hutch, for agreeing to do this. Hutch has been a working photographer based in Calgary for over 30 years. His work spans commercial business photography, including album covers for A&M Records, as well as an art practice that is nationally recognized. Somewhere in between those two poles is his work for artists and curators. He's photographed many exhibitions, including Nickle exhibitions, as well as artworks in the past. In 2014, his work was included in Folly Chateau Mathieu at Nickle Galleries, an exhibition that was curated by Diana Sherlock. The exhibition actually featured works from a small group of Alberta artists resulting from an amazing residency in France. Hutch completed his M.F.A. in New Media at the University of Calgary in 2004. Yay, he's an alumni. His artistic practice is broad and involves photography, printmaking, sculptural installations, audio, video, and performance works. He's presented his work and theories in numerous lectures and public presentations and been the recipient of a number of grants and awards. He's taught for 20 years and has also invested a considerable part of his career in the community. He's been co-director of the Truck Gallery, a photography facilitator at the Banff Centre, and has contributed to a number of arts boards. And on behalf of that arts community, Thank you, Hutch, for your commitment and your leadership. In this talk, Hutch Hutchinson will discuss his recent photography and the questions it raises about how we see. So I will stop sharing and invite you to share, Hutch, and thank you so much.
All right. Am I on? I'm on. I'm going to start the program, I think, if I can figure it out. All right, do you see that? I guess not.
We see it and I'm laughing.
We see, don't call me Mark.
Yeah, that's true. I've been called Hutch since I was a teenager. And, you know, as a matter of fact, my dad was called Hutch. And I was a teenager before I found out he had a real name. I thought his name was Hutch. So speaking of teenagers, this is 1974 and I was 15 years old, 14, 15, I can't count. I included this image because it's only a year or two after I started taking photographs and acquiring a camera and getting all that stuff. And this is a setup. This is taken by me with a camera on a tripod, with everything on the table, carefully curated, so that my asthma stuff was there, and the ketchup bottle and the old radio and the glass milk bottle. I mean, we didn't have glass milk bottles in the 70s. So I just want to exhibit this because I realized looking at it that it's kind of set the tone for everything else. This is the top image is from O.G. Rylander in 1858, sorry. And it's a guy I've been fascinated with since the 70s. And partly because, he does constructions, and how do I put this? He uses himself in the constructions quite often, and most of the times it's a bit ham-fisted and melodramatic and over the top. And honestly, I think that set the tone for what I ended up doing for many years. I worked with myself as a subject in the photographs for over 20 years. And towards the end of it, I did a lot of panoramas from a camera that I built myself back in the old film days. And that's one of them. So I'm going to skip the next 20 years and just go to the 2000s. And basically, what I discovered in the 2000s was that there was a lot of stuff in my house that had been drifting around for almost 40 years. I've lived in this house for 40 years. And, it has no right to be here. It just sort of exists. And I decided to document this stuff, but with a particular camera that records an enormous amount of detail, which you can't really see in these images. It was about sort of things like, well, resolution, but it was also about living with this stuff that just shows up. This in particular, this object was like literally underfoot at a friend's house that was getting demolished. And they kind of found it the night before the tractors moved in and said, "Here, do you want this?" It's a real skull. So what can I say? Constructions. Again, I'm a studio photographer. I was trained in the 1970s at what was then ACA in studio photography. The photography program there was not about journalism or working in the environment so much as it was creating an environment in an empty space in a studio. And while I have a studio, I sometimes branch out from that and start to create stuff in the more used spaces of my house. However, you know, oh, I don't know. I'm just going to go over this stuff quick. It's everyday stuff. And, you know, with copper wire, baking tin, and dynamite stumping box. And, you know, for some reason, it means something to me. So these disconnected visual metaphors, you know, maybe it's just for looks. I'm not really sure. It doesn't have a symbolism that I find very easy to talk about. And anyway, that's not the point of this, really, of this whole talk. It's really about more about this camera. Although all these recent images have been shot with this camera, it has one other feature in that it has a motor attached to it, which works in synchronicity with the software that runs the camera. And the motor can either be placed under the camera to make panoramas or placed under the object to do what's called a rollout. And this is a sculpture of a cat from the 1940s, made by an artist named Beth Hone. And this is just unwrapping that sculpture so that you can see all 360 degrees of it in one image. This is not what the camera was designed to do. This is where the motor was placed on the ground, just, you know, not connected to anything. And I sat on a rotating tray. And while the camera was scanning it, like it thought it was doing a rollout, I was just, you know, kind of moving back and forth and making different faces. You know, it's, again, melodramatic, overacted. It's my jam, man. So these are rollouts of a skull that were flipped back into a polar anamorphic image by using a little piece of software, but it's actually easy enough to do in Photoshop directly without the software. But you know, it's just a little quicker with the filter that you can get. And it's really a simple thing, but these are both from the same original image. So the same rollout created both of these. One is inside out, one's outside in. The other thing that I noticed with these doing these rollouts, because there was a certain amount of experimentation at the start. This was done with a steel ball as a backdrop, and whatever's in the very center of the image gets spread out over the entire image, where the stuff that's in front of that image then gets kind of reproduced in a more normal sort of way. Here, we'll go to one that's a little bit more legible. I should talk about content a little bit. These early ones were really experiments to see how the camera was going to work. And how difficult it would be to do a composition in 3 dimensions that's photographed flat, if you get my drift. So, you know, what you're placing doesn't have a kind of a real resemblance to the world we live in. It comes out differently. And in these early experiments, I was finding how some things stretched right out. So the skull, which is in the center of the image, is stretched out, but since it's not right in the very center of the image, as opposed to those grapes you can see, it doesn't get stretched quite as much. I don't really consider this manipulation of the image. The scanner and rollout apparatus sees differently than us, but it's only sort of differently. I mean, it still uses the same optics and the same physics, and it's how we assemble the image cognitively, like in our brains, how we make an image. that the camera is very different because it approaches it extremely literally, right? So it has to stretch things out to make the physics work, but you know, at the end of the day, it's like I said, I don't consider it a manipulation, even after using this filter, because in the end, the filter kind of reformulates the image back into what it started out as. I have a quote here from Norman Bryson that I found that I thought was kind of amazing. And it's the unit of direction is not the line, as in Albertinian or perspectival painting, but the arc, since bodily movements always curve, and the unit of interval is less linear measure than relative degrees of rotation. Gesture is always a matter of turning. So he's talking about Zurbaran in the 17th century, and in particular his still lives. And I must say that kind of intrigued me, because both in setting up these images, you know, you have to work in the round, and you can't really see what you're going to get until you get it. These are a bunch of failures. I think that although this one, I got to say, this one does kind of intrigue me more than some of the others. And it's partly because of that clown in the center that's severely messed up. Although, I don't know. Again, the reason I think that these images don't work is because they're not personal. None of this stuff was mine. It was, it all came from other people, or I went shopping for it. This one, for some reason, was in my head. It's a drain pipe with a bunch of bridegrooms. And I actually had to go shopping for these things. And I think that's why it doesn't work. Maybe I can explain that later. This is what happens when you get carried away with the filters, and you know, your original kind of sucks. This one is done with a wig in behind the setup that's being blown by a pet hair dryer, no, a pet dryer, big, strong, you know, hair dryer, basically. And again, it doesn't work. Mechanical stuff doesn't work, really. Although there is something in this that I inherited that nobody seems to know what it is. So I did return to more traditional content, and I returned to more traditional content. Unfortunately, when this one got wrapped into a polar anamorphic image, this appeared. And honestly, I had no idea. So I'm starting to think maybe these are self-portraits. You know, Penis Knife Man might be my swan song. This is what happens when you place the eggs in the center of the image and move the Medalta jars out to the side. And this is what happens when that's wrapped into a polar anamorph. Again, this is sort of a half and half. Live with. Those are all the pills that I was taking, my parents died 5 or 6 years ago, and they left behind a cache of medicine. And that was how the pharmacy wanted it to be returned, just in a, you know, in a baggie with all this stuff. So I threw it all together and made this, which made a really interesting polar anamorph. And to be completely frank, this one's not a simple one, but a little bit more complicated. Speaking of the obvious, I tried a few obvious ones too. This is the piggy bank I grew up with. This is a collection of my tin toys. This is me buying stuff at Thanksgiving. So I want to talk a little bit about artifacts, because at this resolution, you're probably not seeing too many, although with this image, you can see very, very strong ones. The red and blue shift is from the object moving the wrong direction. So when you have an object that is not in the very center of the image, and it rotates around, as it goes behind, it's still visible, but it's going the wrong direction. So there's a kind of a lag between how the scanning camera operates. And just to be clear about how the scanning camera operates, it's one line, it's one bar of sensors, and it records red, blue, and yellow, red, green, and yellow. Yeah. And then it overlays that raw data on top of it, on top of itself, and you get an image in the end. However, even something as kind of mundane as this, my all beige image, turned into something kind of figurative. Let's just say figurative. So as the summer progressed, things got kind of dark. And this again is the clown with a couple hundred bobbing head dogs. I have over 1,000 of these bobbing head dogs. If anybody wants them, let me know. This is something I discovered in the filter pack when I was looking at that image, that last image, and it sort of just showed up, and I saved it because it's super creepy. But super creepy, well, no, that's not super creepy. Like I said, things got kind of sad over the summer, and you know, and I think it's just because I've been quarantined. I haven't been going out. You know, at the end of the summer, you realize that the whole thing's just passed and everything feels like wasted opportunities. And I think that influenced the way I was sort of making work. But, you know, to be entirely honest, there is an element to this stuff that's like, look at my weird stuff. Like you know, I have some really weird stuff. And I'm going to show you, this is the one that I like the best. And I'm going to show you the other 5 iterations I made, because one of the things about being in your own studio and kind of having no other demands on your time is that you can mess around with something for a month if you feel like it. And yeah, that's a plasticine version of my face that got dropped off a table. So this is called various mechanical devices. There is an element to these things where I have been asked what the meaning is. And I think that's a difficult question for me, partly because in the tradition of still lives, I think the meaning is often buried. And I lost my opportunity. There was somewhere in the past here I was gonna mention something about how still lives actually sort of work and where they worked the best. So if you think of, you know, the Dutch or well, the Dutch still lives, you know, you can almost see that whole practice, not just of the still life, but of the kind of Dutch painting of everyday scenes as a way to kind of honor the quotidian, you know, to honor the everyday, in a reaction against, I think, what they perceived as overblown history painting that came out of other areas of Europe at that time in the 17th century. And, you know, it's kind of a way of how do you measure success, you know, in different cultures. And so the idea, I think, of actually doing the kind of work that was done in Northern Europe is again a kind of a reaction against the excessive wealth and power that seemed to be coming out of Southern Europe. Now, having said that, there is certainly symbolism in these things. You know, what I'm interested in doing is encoding an image. I'm not really interested in decoding the image. You know, that's okay, but that's sort of a historical way of looking at stuff. I'm more interested in somebody looking at this and wondering what the code is for it and how that actually works. So, you know, it's been part of my practice now for about 20 years, from making narratives and stories about things that didn't happen or might have happened or could have happened, you know, to well, basically outright lying. So, you know, there is still something very beautiful about the way that the camera and editing and all that stuff works. When I say editing, I mean color and tone. This is hardly beautiful. Couldn't decide which one worked best. So here we're getting into stuff that I think is definitely encoded in some way, but I'm not that interested in figuring out what that is. It has grown. This is my most recent thing. And it has grown into kind of a surge of putting in different elements to try to encode something. This is actually what the setup looks like, you know, just taken with my phone. And that was what it looked like when it was unwrapped. Go back here. And this is what it looks like as a polar anamorphic image. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is a series of images I made of plants that is done by trickery. Let's just put it this way. So the scanning back, when you're doing a rollout or a panorama, it locks the scanner into one position and rotates the object or the camera, the idea being. So if you take an object like a flower and rotate that object with the scanning back going in the opposite direction. So the scanning back's been turned 90 degrees and the object's rotated in the normal direction, and it unwraps these kind of vegetable morasses. This is rose hips. This is also rose hips. So you can see if you get something right in the center of it, it just makes a straight line. These images are full of artifacts because, again, things go the wrong way at times. And I've actually kind of learned that I like some of the artifacts. It's an onion, a green onion. So what these images are doing is that they're what all photography does is that it relies on the index, right? It has to have an indexical relationship with the subject matter, or it's not a photograph. You know, I mean, even, you know, spirit photography had an indexical relationship with the spirit. That was the point of it. So these images, actually, when you get as close as you can to them, even looking at them like this, you know, there's definitely an attachment to the object that is indexical, but it doesn't refer to the object. It doesn't look like the object. It doesn't have, at the end of the day, the image doesn't look anything like what you get when you're looking at the flowers that you're putting in front of it. So it has index without the iconic part of it. And if there's, you know, symbolism, then, you know, that's up to you. So I actually have shown these three images. Well, no, maybe not these three, but these two, just by, you know, you add something into the image and it changes completely. There's an orange petal in here. Or with something like these two, where you move the camera half an inch or an inch, and you get a completely different kind of image. I mean, there's you know, some of the squirreliness and the artifacting in the bottom image there just excluded it from use, but still, it's kind of useful to look at it this way. I should be telling you what all these things are, because as an index, you know, they relate to the flowers that were being used. So we have an echinacea. Oh, I should have looked at these titles. I remember them. I can't remember the name of the plants. They're mostly daylilies, and that one on the right is actually a red cabbage. This is mountain ash berries. These are more daylilies. I think you know, the other thing was I tried to get in really close to find out what was exactly going on with these things. And of course that presented some challenges trying to keep everything in focus. I have to use almost 6,000 watts of light on these continuous light sources on these images, because the camera is not very efficient at capturing the stuff. It needs a lot of light, and the other thing is that it's large. It sits on a 4x5 inch camera back, and that means that your standard lenses are in the 150 mil range, and depth of field is almost non-existent. But when you zoom in on some of these things, there's an amazing amount of detail, and this should be sharper because I just blew up the JPEG, but you know, it's actually as sharp as the image can be. Again, tiger lilies. Oh no, this is a colors off. This is a poppy. Mountain ash again. More mountain ash. I got to admit, some of these were just fun. And sometimes it got a bit stupid. You know, I mean, something like this, I don't know what the point of it is. Well, I don't know what the point of any of them are, but you know, this one looks a little bit too filtered. Whereas I really have to say this, like this image has been rotated 90 degrees. That's all that's been done. I started playing with the depth of field, limited focus. There's one with more. Here's one with less. Manipulating some tone in the background. This is delphinium and oh, some obscure stupid flower that only grows in my yard. Again, delphiniums. So this is what the tiger or the Oriental Asiatic lilies look like. In this one, you could say there's index, iconic relationship, and a symbol. You know what? This is all simple stuff. Don't need to talk about it. This is what the 90-degree twist looked like, and this is what the anamorphic distortion looks like. I think the other thing about these is that they have you know, a kind of an internal consistency. So the highlights and the shadows seem to make sense of them as an object, even though that object is being created by you know, by the camera, really. Well, there's, like I said, still indexical relationship. I'm just going to skip over a few of these pretty quick here. Here's a good example of the artifacting that comes. So, okay. You know what this work has made me think is that when the camera was developed, you know, it reinforced a kind of an idea of perspective that started, you know, pre-Renaissance times. But the notion of perspective carries a lot of psychological and cultural implications. And the camera being invented, you know, really solidified a lot of those implications. But one has to kind of wonder if the camera hadn't been invented, would we be seeing things in a different way? So it's a chicken and egg thing, and all I've done is sort of reverse the proposition that, you know, that photography was built to, you know, mimic the perspective that we're used to. And of course, perspective existed before cameras, but, you know, there is something there. Cameras obscuras go back a long way. So even without, you know, being able to capture an image, the idea of the image being projected onto something is very old. So, you know, the question that comes up in my mind occasionally, because these images have that kind of internal consistency, they have that logic, they have that indexical quality, the iconic stuff, is that something that, as I do this more and more, do I start to see these things this way? That's the question. This is just a mess, this one. And yes, it's kind of, you can kind of make an endless amount of these. And they will blow up to a very large size. Again, this is the poppies that I showed you earlier. I've just quit talking, haven't I? So I'm going to leave you with this last image of me in my studio flying on a winch. And that's going to be it, I think. I think I had something to say about this image, but now I don't know what it is.
Maybe it'll come back to you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And I would like to invite everybody, or some of you, to ask questions. Or the chat is now open. If you don't feel like speaking, you can type your chat. I think Shelley's got her hand up and she's unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Hey, thanks very much for your talk, Hutch. It was really, really great. And I was really struck by that circular form and how it becomes almost weirdly architectural. It makes me feel like I'm looking up into this fresco, especially with the swirling objects, the puppies, which I would gladly take off your hand. But I'm wondering about that sort of, it really does feel architectural in some way. And I wonder if you could talk about that form a little bit more. That circle, I know it's working with the filter, but it really does seem to harken back to some of your early work, that circle.
Yeah.
That
I've been putting stuff into circles now for, 15 years, 10 years, something like that. It's partly because, you know, I didn't start out being really fascinated by circles, and there is a name for that, isn't there? Chris Cran, you know, has a name for those things.
Tondo.
Tondos, that's right. Which is an architectural reference, I think, isn't it? Tondo.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the reason I ended up going towards circles was probably because of the panorama lends itself to being connected again and looped into a kind of a circular image. And I think I see the circular images as a plan of the actual setup that I've made. You know, it's almost like a diagram of it. So it kind of goes through these stages where it goes to a panorama, and then from the panorama, it goes to a diagram. And that makes me very comfortable. I don't know why. I just love diagrams.
Go ahead, Lori.
Hi, Hutch. I'm just wondering, do you have a picture or can you show a quick shot of what that camera looks like? The way you were talking about it, I'm just a little confused. Is it's a regular camera and you added to it? Is that how that works?
Really not going to help, Lori.
I'll have to go
Hold
look
on.
at Hutch.
That's it there.
Okay, that doesn't
So
help.
can you make it out? It's actually it's a standard 4x5 camera,
Okay.
right? That's connected to a computer. This is irrelevant, not part of it. That's just part of the light stand. So the camera is connected to the computer, but in the for 4x5 cameras, you have to insert a film holder. So the scanning back is actually a film holder. It works just like that. You insert it into the back of a regular camera.
Okay.
So it is a regular, and as a matter of fact, I bought that camera in the second year of art school, 1970. Randy, when was that? 1978. I'm going to say 1978. And you can go and buy one of these cameras now, and it's exactly the same. And it's been the same since the 40s,
Wow.
right? So it's interesting. You know, I was thinking about this the other day, that pre-digital, we used to keep different film stocks for different things, you know, for different looks, for different feels. We just not only different film stocks, but it would be developed in different things. Sometimes you would, you know, you would have different chemicals that you would use, right? And you know, now it's like if you take your image and you modify it in Photoshop, you feel guilty like a sinner, you know, like you've committed some kind of evil crime. I'm getting over that.
I'm afraid I shared probably that same history, although I never went into photography, but tungsten film. Remember tungsten film? Yeah. Go
But
ahead.
even high-speed films,
Yeah.
you know, like as opposed to low-speed films, you can get really grainy stuff, and you know, yeah, there is something here too, where like somebody like Svetlana Alpers talks about the distinction between describing and narrative, right? So you can describe something, but it stops it. And there's a reason that still lives are called still lives. They're described very well, but they're not moving, they're still. The thing with this camera is that it doesn't actually photograph anything that's moving. If something's moving, everything goes to hell, right? So it's you know, there's a kind of a level of description there that defies narration. And in the old days when we had grainy film and gestural stuff that we could do with the camera, you know, it was a different story.
MK Paget, please go ahead.
Thanks, Hutch, for your
Mike.
talk. Thanks, Michelle, for hosting this, and Marla, it's wonderful to join one of these remotely. Hutch, simple question: height of flattery or painful insult if someone wrote an algorithm to untwist your twisty things?
Well, as a matter of fact, you can run an algorithm. You just run the twisted thing back through the filter after it's been filtered, and it untwists it, sort of. Yeah, I'd be happy to see somebody do that. I think that would be really interesting. I think what's interesting about it, again, is it still has this kind of, you know, when you look at them close, you go, I know that plant, you know that petal. It's something that is not completely abstracted. And yet, you know, when you look at it from a distance, it doesn't look like anything normal. Did that answer your question, Mike?
Absolutely, and I think it speaks to this other core bit, like there's something about form and there's something about color, and it's you know, it's just on the tip of your tongue when you're looking at the pictures, and it's wonderfully executed.
You know, I have to say, the photography in general, you know, within the art world is used as a kind of a document, right, of some place or thing that people have seen. And so being a studio photographer is a bit of a problem in this day and age. And I, you know, not just in photography, but I kind of tend to think of you know, that a lot of issue-based work is the kind of high art of our era, you know? And I think to strip something away from that issue is to kind of take away, you know, any pretense of it being anything other than just what it is. And I'm pretty happy with just what it is. In fact, this has been one of the most amazing years because, you know, I can go out in the yard and grab something, put it on the stand, take a picture of it and go, what the hell? You know, that hasn't happened to me in 40 years or longer, since 1974.
I want to bring you stuff.
Sorry?
I want to bring you stuff. Hutch, just a comment while we wait for another question from people. I invite you all. One of your first images in this presentation was of a marble on a surface. And I'm intrigued by how you started with that marble and ended up with these large circular forms that are kind of like marbles.
Yeah.
Am I
no
looking
kidding.
for something that isn't there, or?
No, but you know, I have to say that it's actually a rubber ball, that little thing.
Okay.
But I have to say that there's a reason that I didn't just kick it down the stairs. You know, I mean, there's a lot of crap in my house, and there's a reason that thing got picked up and put on the windowsill and photographed. And I have been making kind of Tondo based images before that, you know, round based stuff before that. So yeah, I think there probably is some connection there. But I got to say that those connections are generally, what's the word for it? Subconscious. You know, it's just below the level of where you're actually literally thinking. There's a word for that, I think.
Interesting sort of microcosm, which is fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, other questions? We've got lots of photographers who've joined us today. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Paul. He's typed in the chat box. Have you considered or wondered if the filtering could be partially reversed, as if a viewer with an ability to partially decode it was attempting to figure out what the original objects were?
Yeah, that's fantastic. That would be great, actually. And you know, it's kind of possible. But the problem is it's only going to get you back as far as the twist, the twisted image, because those are literally made in the camera. There's no filter or anything that's working there. So to untwist an image would be incredibly difficult because it's recording. Wow, it's really hard to explain. So as something rotates like this, it records a line across that object, but that line keeps getting pushed down and down and down and down as they accumulate. You know, as the recording lines accumulate, it makes a longer, more, you know, vertical sort of thing. So to undo that would be amazing. That would be fantastic. Be cool. And yes, I see Paul's other message. There is some loss when it goes from the rollout image to the anamorphic image. There is some loss in there in size, but you know, generally the anamorphic or the rollout images are huge, right? I think they're over 8 feet by 3 feet, you know, at 300 dpi. So they're very, very big images. So when I go down to the smaller one, it still provides me plenty of resolution. Yeah.
Wow. I wanted to ask you, Hutch, if you are aware of the Museum of Fear and Wonder in Sundre. I'll put the link in the chat bar. It is a really interesting private museum run by the Griebel brothers, who I think share some aesthetic preferences for old stuff, old weird stuff. Yeah, I don't know if they're open this year, but check it out online.
I have seen the collection that's west of Calgary towards Cochrane. No idea who the guy is. He's got a huge underground thing that's full of steam engines and African artifacts and cars.
Yep, that is the Canadian Museum of Technology or something.
Something like that. Yeah,
that's a different museum.
It's fascinating, though. I mean, I think partly what fascinates me is that there's a way to knowledge that is not something that we kind of readily accept or understand. And if you look back far enough, where you go to the cabinets of curiosity, sort of before people had done a taxonomy of stuff and divided things into genus and species and all that sort of thing, is that, stuff was put together because it evoked a response. And they may have nothing to do with each other, you know, a stuffed alligator and a you know, a thing for looking at the stars. Sorry, I can't remember what it's called. But no, not a telescope, a sextant. But you know, when you put those things together, you can't predict exactly what's going to happen. And so it's kind of hard to justify what's going on until you get a big enough mass of things, you know, that kind of explain that. And I have to say that, you know, my parents lived in the same house for 65 years.
Wow.
And I've lived in this house for 40 years, and I inherited all their crap. And they never threw anything out. I mean, they were depression kids.
Yeah.
So you know, I'm living with a huge storehouse of material that has nothing to do with anything else. So maybe that's why I think of it that way, partly just out of necessity, you know.
We have time for another question if anybody would like to share or type in the box or type in the chat. Don't be shy. This is your chance.
Oops. Well, they're not talking. I'm not going to talk.
Gee whiz. Sorry, Hutch. I have another question. Do you have any exhibitions in the works? Anything on the horizon?
You know, no, I don't. You know, I must say the whole COVID thing has kind of stopped everything.
Yeah.
And you know, I have to say, I kind of like it. To be entirely honest, having no deadlines, no job to go to, you know, being able to just work in my studio has been a dream of mine for my entire life. So I'm kind of really okay with this whole, you know, this whole thing. Other than the fact that, you know, I've only touched like one person in the last year, you know, so that's a bit depressing. But yeah, you know, it's all right.
There's definitely a silver lining to COVID. You know, for some of us, for others, we just feel guilty that we're not doing more, writing, you know, big treatises or something. But it's so gratifying to know that you're thriving and you're, you know, like a mad professor in your little studio there and creating, you know, really exciting and beautiful objects that truly make us look differently. So thank you so much for this talk. Thank you all for joining us here. I will get the recording cleaned up and posted to our YouTube channel probably in about a week. So do join us next week for Erin Sidorenko and see, I'm going to call you Mark because I'm reading your name. Hutch, thank you so much. This was awesome. So
thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.